好，我们来学习足部骨骼的第二部分，也就是最后一部分啊。
So the distal group of tarsal bones are just those bones which articulate with the metatarsals.
So the distal group of tarsal bones are just those bones which articulate with the metatarsals。就是我们腹股远端的这几块骨头呢，实际上就是与我们的子骨相连的。
So the intermediate bone, this navicular bone, sits between the proximal row and the distal row of tarsal bones.
So the intermediate bone 在中间的这块骨头 ，this navicular bone 这个足舟骨 sits between the proximal row and the distal row of the tarsal bone。它位于我们腹股的近端和远端的当中的位置。
So just looking back at the proximal bones, you've got the calcaneus, which articulates above with the talus, and anteriorly it articulates with the cuboid bone.
So just looking back at the proximal bones， 我们再看一下我们的近端的骨头。You've got the calcaneus which articulate above with the talus， 我们就有一个根骨，它与它上方的距骨相连。And anterior 就前部的，it articulates with the cuboid bone。它前部呢与什么骨相连？与头骨相连 ，cuboid bone。
And the talus bone articulates below with the calcaneus, and anteriorly it articulates with the navicular, the intermediate bone.
And the talus bone articulates below with the calcaneus, and anteriorly it articulates with the navicular, the intermediate bone。距骨呢与其下方的根骨相连，它的前部呢与位置居中的这个足舟骨相连。
So looking at the navicular, you can see it's anteriorly, it articulates with the cuneiform bones, so the medial, intermediate and lateral cuneiform bones.
So looking at the navicular, you can see anteriorly it articulates with the cuneiform bone, so the medial, intermediate and the lateral cuneiform bones。所以说我们看一下足舟骨其前部呢与楔骨相连，分别是内侧、中间和外侧楔骨。
And the cuboid bone in the distal row of tarsal bones articulates anteriorly with the lateral two metatarsals, and the cuneiform bones articulate anteriorly with the medial three metatarsal bones. So those are
And the cuboid bone in the distal row of the tarsal bones articulates anteriorly with the lateral two metatarsals, and the cuneiform bones articulate anteriorly with the medial three metatarsal bones。所以说呢，就是说腹股远端的这个头骨它的前部与外侧两块子骨相连，那么楔骨的前部呢与内侧的三块子骨相连。就是5块子骨怎么样跟中间的这几个骨头相连的，中间的4个骨头如何就是与我们的子骨相连的，也就是说我们的腹股远端的这4块骨头如何和我们的子骨相连的。
Those are the 7 tarsal bones. So you've got
So those are the 7 tarsal bones. 所以说这就是这7块腹骨
a proximal row with the 2 large bones, the talus and the calcaneus.
总结一下 So you've got the proximal row with the 2 large bones, the talus and the calcaneus。所以说呢，就是说在这个近端你有2块大骨头，分别是距骨和根骨。
And you've got a distal row which contains the cuneiform bones, the 3 cuneiform bones, and laterally you've got the cuboid bone.
And you've got a distal row which contains the cuneiform, the 3 cuneiform bones, and laterally you've got the cuboid bone。所以说呢，在远端呢是这个楔骨，共有3块，外侧呢是头骨。
Then you've got an intermediate bone called the navicular, which sits in between the proximal and the distal row of tarsals.
And then you've got an intermediate bone called the navicular, which sits in between the proximal and the distal row of tarsals。那么中间的那块骨头呢，我们就称之为足舟骨，位于腹股近端与远端之间。
So anterior or distal to the distal tarsal bones, you've got the 5 metatarsals. So you've got a base, a shaft and a head to each metatarsal.
So anterior or distal to the distal tarsal bones, you've got the 5 metatarsals. So you've got a base, a shaft, a head to each metatarsal 啊，就在前面呢，或者说就是说腹骨远端的末端呢是5块，是5根这个子骨啊，这子骨，每块子骨呢它近侧叫什么呢？叫底，中部呢叫体，远端呢则称为头啊，英文分别是 base 这底啊，中部呢叫 shaft 啊，我们说球杆也叫 shaft 啊，这个头叫 head 啊 ，base shaft and head 中文就叫底体头底部体身体的体啊，头部的头啊，这就是我们的子骨的3个部分啊，这部位啊，底体头，英文叫 base shaft and head。
And then even more distally, you've got the phalanges. So the phalanges consist of 3 bones.
And even more distally, you've got the phalanges. So the phalanges consist of 3 bones. 那更远端呢，我们就是子骨，由3块骨头构成。
We've got a proximal, a middle, and a distal phalanx, except for the great toe, which just has a proximal and distal phalanx.
So you've got a proximal, a middle, and a distal phalanx. 它读 phalanx， 但是有道上面是读 phalanx 啊，无所谓，这个不用太纠结了。Except for the great toe, which just has the proximal and the distal phalanx or phalanx 啊，所以说呢，你就有一个就是说分为近节，我们叫近节、中节和远节的子骨，这个叫近节，这个叫中节，这个叫远节。分为这3个不同的子骨啊，拇指除外啊，拇指是这2啊，这个是拇指，它只有2块，只有近节和远节，它就没有中间的一节。所以说，你看1块、2块，再加上这12块，总共14块，我们的子骨就是14块。Altogether we have 14 phalanges 啊，总共是14块子骨啊。好了，那么关于足部的骨骼介绍就这么多简单的介绍啊，文字内容给大家看一下，有兴趣可以截个图参考一下。第1页。第2页，第3页，最后一页。好了，结束了，再见。